licensed professional pilot. We spend the whole time just introducing these qualifications. But today we're going to hear more about Dr. Moore's perspective from the IAEA, what they do, and their role in the nuclear non-proliferation tests that they have. Please welcome George Moore.
Michael, thank you for that introduction. Trying to live up to some of the things. As Michael said, I went to school here down at Chicago. Looked a little different then. There were volleyball courts and things like that. That were Soda Hall, Jacobs Hall are now located. So I'm going to talk to you about the origins of international safeguards, and we'll talk about the history and what's going on now with safeguards. Now this is not working.
It doesn't work? Yeah. Can you try again? Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So we'll cover the history. And by the way, as I'm sure Berkeley students are prone to, if you have a question, do it at the beginning when it occurs to you. Don't wait till the end. I may forget by the end what I said in the beginning. So a couple of takeaways. What I'd like you to take away from this. First of all, is an understanding what safeguards is and how it developed. Safeguards is the concept of safeguarding nuclear material. Anybody have a definition of nuclear material? I understood that most of you were from nuclear engineering, right? So, what? All but one. You must be the one.
I'm the one.
Okay. What's nuclear material?
Any principle, any material principally used in the construction of nuclear weapons or reactors.
Okay, that would be a definition.
Physical materials. Uranium, plutonium.
Okay. This is a bit of a trick question. Okay. In the United States, we don't really define nuclear material. We define special nuclear material for weapons. The IAEA does not mention in the statute nuclear material. It talks about special fissionable material and source material. I wrote a paper about 3 or 4 years ago, and I put out like 7 or 8 different definitions. And this is a paper for the Institute of Nuclear Materials Management. And when you look at their bylaws, they have no definition of nuclear material. But generally speaking, people think of this as the forms of uranium and forms of plutonium from which you can make a nuclear yield producing weapon. Bomb, whatever device, whatever you want to call it. But there are other things, and there are about a dozen different radionuclides, because they're all radioactive, that you could make a bomb out of, such as Neptunium-237 or Americium-241. Americium-241, probably not in these smoke detectors, but in the little smoke detectors you buy for your house. When I was at Livermore Lab, probably once a year, once every other year, someone would call from Washington and say, oh, if somebody got a whole bunch of smoke detectors, couldn't they make a bomb? Well, the amount of material in a smoke detector is a few micrograms. To have a critical mass, you need multiple kilograms. So you can do the math, and if you gathered up all the smoke detectors in the world and had 100% efficiency recovery, you might get close to what you might need to build a weapon. Plus, it would be a really crummy weapon because Americium-241 is thoroughly radioactive when you put it together. So, okay, little diversion.
Sure. Simple question. How about other isotopes that are weapons relevant? For example, either tritium or like lithium-6 or something? Those
are not considered either nuclear material. Those are lithium-6. There's a certain percentage of normal lithium that's lithium-6 to usefully produce. Lithium-6 is used to produce tritium. Thermal neutron cross-section for lithium-6 yielding an alpha particle and a triton is very huge, and it's a very exothermic reaction. So one of the problems you have when you do this, and I did this in the old Berkeley reactor a lot, is you have to seal the darn stuff in quartz. because the thermal properties are just terrible. As soon as it sees any neutron flux, you have a problem. But to do it usefully, you've got to get the enriched version, which Oak Ridge produces. Tritium, I don't want to go into details of what tritium is used for, but tritium is essentially used, we do now, 20 years ago, we couldn't talk about boosting, but boosting is now an unclassified topic. You use a mixture of tritium and deuterium to produce a high flux of high energy 14 MeV neutrons. This increases the yield of the fission component of the fission weapon. But those are not considered nuclear material or special nuclear material. They're just materials. Tritium is radioactive, lithium-6 is not. And one thing I did learn, lithium as a metal it looks like butter. And when you hydrate it, it's a very exothermic hydration reaction. And you can explode it. A little poof and a fire. I did that machine. Not good. Okay, so you want to understand that safeguards is not a monolith. There are a number of different safeguards regimes. You want to figure out how that comes together. Safeguards is a system of accounting and control of the material. It does not prevent, and is not designed to prevent, theft or diversion. It is designed to detect theft and or diversion. By diversion, I mean diversion into a weapons program. So, for example, we'll talk about a term called significant quantity. And significant quantity has some political ramifications because it's tied to this idea of detecting diversion. I'll get to that. So at this point, if you're confused, don't worry about it. Okay. The IAEA is an independent international organization. It is not part of the UN. It is not like the UN Office of Drugs and Crime. It is not like WHO, World Health Organization. It is an independent body. It has a different membership. Now, most of the members of the IAEA are members of the UN, but not all UN members are members of the IAEA. So it's got a different membership. It operates the same. When you work there, if you have certain status, you carry what's called a laissez-passer, which is a UN passport. But the Director General theoretically is on the same level as the UN Director General. In reality, not so much. Currently, it's Yukio Amano from Japan. He's about to term out. These people are elected. Probably the best candidate right now, I think, is an Argentinian. That will have make some changes. Prior to Amano, it was Mohammed al-Baradei from Egypt. And you go back through the whole history of Director General. Director General position at the IAEA has a lot of influence because it is the Director General who reports for the agency to the UN Security Council. The IAEA does not report to the General Council. It's nothing to do with the General Council. The General Council may pass resolutions like Resolution 1540, dealing with WMD. That's not associated with the IAEA. In fact, to some extent, in nuclear security, they were competitive programs for a while. So they kind of got everybody lined up. So the way the IAEA is set up is at the top, you've got the Director General. Beneath him, there are Deputy Director Generals. There are three that are really important. There are 6 or 7. The 3 that are important are the DG, Deputy Director General for Safeguards, currently a Russian. The Deputy Director General for Safety and Security, which is currently Spaniard, and the Deputy Director General for Technical Cooperation, which is the group within the agency that is supposed to put out training, human resource development, etc., in the nuclear area to the member states. The other DDGs are like human resources and management, that sort of thing. Those are much smaller. The big gorilla in the whole thing is safeguards. Always has been, probably will continue to be. We'll talk about that more later. And beneath the DDGs are various departments, and within the departments are divisions. Occasionally you have, like when I was there, we had an office for nuclear security. Because nuclear security is relatively new on the scene. It came about in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, wake of concern about nuclear security and the collapse of the Soviet Union. You were we're seeing things coming out of the Soviet Union that nobody ever anticipates. I have personally seen entire laboratories with like sodium iodide crystals this big up for sale. You can just buy. So that's the structure. We can talk later about, you know, if you want to work there, how you go about working there. But the structure is kind of interest.
I mentioned one of our recent graduates, Sarah Lederman, who received a master's in nuclear engineering and a master's in public policy. She's an MIT undergrad. And she's now in the Safeguards Division at IAEA in Vienna.
So, as you're aware, I'm sure, from this course and from even before this course probably, you know, in World War II, only one nuclear power, that's the U.S. United Nations formed. Who knows where the UN formed? Where was it formed physically? Where did they get together to form the UN? Across the bay, San Francisco. Go over and take a look. There's a big plaque by Van Ness, the building where they had the first meeting of the UN. It's 1944. So, you know, obviously, Germany and Japan didn't participate. You know, they did. It was designed to replace the League of Nations and maybe get around some of the problems the League of Nations had. And one of the first things that they started looking at after 45 was, what are we going to do about these atomic weapons? Changes the whole ballgame. And it formed the UN Atomic Energy Commission. Some of you have your smartphones and your laptops. Google the UN Atomic Energy Commission. No longer exists. Probably find some historic reference to it. It died in 1952 because we couldn't get along with the Russians. We had a couple of different plans. The Russians were building their own system. You're aware of Klaus Fuchs and the Rosenbergs and the nuclear spying and all that sort of thing. But basically it fell apart. And if you look at it from one point of view, the IAEA is really the successor to the UN Atomic Energy Commission. It's the idea. So the original terms of reference for the UNAEC is the first mention of safeguards. And if you look here, this is from the original terms of reference. It talks about we're extending between all nations, blah, 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 that sort of thing, which really comes about when Eisenhower does his Atoms for Peace speech at the UN in 1953. But if you look down item D, for effective safeguards by way of inspection and other means to protect compliant states against the hazards and violations and evasions. So that's really what safeguards is about. It still is, even though this goes back before the IAEA. So this is just kind of historic. I mean, probably have gone over some of this. The UN made a proposal to, or the US made a proposal to the UN via the UNAEC. We destroy our nuclear weapons if there's a veto-proof UN controls system set in place that would ensure peaceful use on it. I don't know how they would have done that, but that was the concept of the group plan. Plan was passed by the UNAEC, but blocked by the USSR and the Security Council. What is the only time the Russians or Soviets really screwed up at the UN Security Council? One major error that they ever made. Right now, they walked out when they were discussing the invasion of South Korea. The Soviet representative at the UN Security Council got up and stormed out of the meeting. And when he left, they said, let's vote. And there was no Soviet there to veto this. And if you look at the Korean War, although primarily involving US troops, was a United Nations operation. So from then on, you know, there's one guy who's permanently tethered to a chair at the Security Council. No one ever leaves because no one's voted without him there. So you go from the UNAEC to the IAEA, And then you consider the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So the Cold War becomes this big thing. You have the history of the development of nuclear weapons by other states. You have Eisenhower's Acts for Peace. IAEA comes along in 1957. In those days, it was headquartered in a hotel down on Ring Street, ring around the central area of Vienna, kind of a neat place to be. Now it's out across the Danube in the Union International Center. Still a nice place to be. But along with a number of concerns about spread of weapons, about atmospheric testing, a lot of things are going on in the 50s and 60s. Big public sentiment against nuclear weapons. People are frightened. People are rightfully concerned about pollution of the atmosphere from weapons testing, atmospheric weapons testing, etc. The NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, was in development phase. It took about 3 years to get it together. Because the way you get things like this together is you have conference, initial conference, people cogitate, think about what's going on, but you have to come up with some sort of consensus or near consensus, or people won't sign on. So it really goes into effect in 1970. And what does the NPT do? First of all, it sets up 5 nuclear weapon states. Now, India, Pakistan, North Korea, they are not nuclear weapon states when you consider it from the NPT perspective. And in fact, Pakistan and India are not NPT members. Although you will see that India and Pakistan both have safeguards on certain facilities. How can that be if they're not NPT members? That's what we'll talk about. So the NPT then, the non-nuclear weapon states who are NPT members, they have to execute an agreement with the IAEA to set up a procedure for inspections and accounting for nuclear material in their possession. These are individual documents between the IAEA and those groups. There's not a one-size-fits-all, although there's a guideline for what it's supposed to contain, but there can be variations among. There are no, as far as I know, there are no significant variations. Some of these are public and some of them are not. Majority of them are not public. The agreements between the agency and non-nuclear weapon states. So, statute of the IAEA, not very long, you can read it. Actually, section 20, the exact, as you may recall it, Dos Equis. But that sets out this definition of special fissionable material and source material. But Article 3 authorizes the establishment of safeguards and to apply them at the request of parties to an international instrument or the request of a state. So this is not done necessarily in anticipation, but this falls nicely. This is 1957, 10 years later. You have this international agreement, the NPT, and that's where safeguards starts picking up the majority of what it is now. Article 12 sets up the safeguards program and staff and inspectors. The way the IAEA works is they issue their pronouncements, their regulations in the form, there are a couple of different forms. The major one is in information circulars, which sounds like something that you get from Safeway or something like that that tell you about new sales, but that's not the way it works with the IAEA. These are the bedrock documents which member states are supposed to adhere to. Insert 26 in 1961 covers safeguarding research, test, and power reactors that are less than 100 megawatts thermal. So those of you who are nuclear engineers know that the thermal to electrical ratio, if you're talking about a power system, is about 1 to 3, or 3 to 1, however you want to look at it. So 100 megawatts thermal would be about a 35 megawatt electrical. That would be a very tiny nuclear power plant, not many of those. And insert 66 in 1967 established pre-NPT safeguards. This is binding on all the IAEA members. That's how India and Pakistan, who are IAEA members and participate well in the IAEA program, They have things safeguarded through this, plus other arrangements that they've made. So it's important to understand that. People sometimes talk about signing the NPT, signing onto the NPT. I can't do that anymore. You have to adopt it. Since you put it totally in play. Because there's technically a difference between being a signatory to a treaty and being a member of the treaty. Pre-NPT safeguards rely on the states to declare facilities. In other words, when Insert 66 came out, the states were supposed to say, here's a facility that I have that's subject to this agreement. And here's where it is, and here's what it contains. And then the agency goes about verifying those declarations. They're called declarations. Well, what came along later, not too much later.
George, can you just go back to the
Sure.
first one? We mentioned this, but just to make sure you're clear, a duly authorized representative of the U.S. government signs a treaty. The U.S. is now a signatory to the treaty. So we are signatories to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. However, under U.S. law, the Senate, 2/3 voting and present, have to ratify the treaty. If they ratify the treaty, then we are a party to the treaty, not just a signatory to the treaty. They don't, we're not. So there's been actually no Senate ratification of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. So we're signatories to the CTBT, but not parties to, not members of the CTBT. Got it?
Under the Vienna Treaty that covers treaties, there are certain obligations of a signatory to a treaty. They are not supposed to act to the detriment of the treaty. They're not supposed to violate the treaty knowingly. So while we have to wait for the Senate to approve certain international agreements like the CTBT, and we'll see, there's one other that hung up for a long time. I'll talk about that in a minute. Being a signatory is an important thing, but you can no longer be a signatory to the NPT. You can only ratify the NPT and absorb it into your national law. We don't have the most complicated international structure. There are other countries where, for us to ratify the treaty, all it would take would be a Senate vote. Highly unlikely, unless you can convince Donald Trump that this would make him, eligible for the Nobel Peace Prize if people would do that, or something along those lines. But the point is, other countries have a legal structure where they have to incorporate into all their national laws the treaty provisions. This can be very complicated. They may have to change what would be in the United States the equivalent of state and local laws. And it can take some time. They're sometimes loath to do that. That's not what's hanging up the CTBT. We can talk about that later. So, under the NPT, if you're an NPT member, you have to accept safeguards, and the kind of safeguards you have to accept are set out in Insert 153. This is referred to as comprehensive safeguards. This is an important term because it shows up when you start talking about things like the Nuclear Suppliers Group, who is a voluntary group of countries that supply nuclear dual-use equipment. They are not supposed to supply equipment to countries that do not have comprehensive safeguards in place. 153 establishes the state system of accounting and control, the SSAC. This is the bookkeeping aspect of safeguards. So what safeguards is really doing, if you have nuclear material in this room, they come and they say, well, where's your nuclear material? It's in this room. It's 3 kilograms. We check, it's 3 kilograms. Everything's fine. They don't check the doors and locks. They don't look at security guards. They don't do that sort of thing. They don't care about, other than their personal protection, what you have in place for safety systems. They are safeguarding in the sense of accounting for the nuclear material. So Other portions of NSERC 153 cover information and access. One of the things that's not well understood is under any of these safeguards agreements, the state, the non-nuclear weapon state, can reject any inspector. Yes. No holds barred. You just say, in the United States, we don't want them. From the UK, we don't want them. We only want people who are incompetent. So send us all your incompetent inspectors. Well, hopefully the IAEA doesn't have too many incompetent inspectors, but this can be a real challenge, particularly with some countries. I knew, in fact, a fellow of the agency who caught the North Koreans cheating, reprocessing fuel. And he was a Russian. He was a head inspector in that region of the world. And Vladimir told me, he said, I didn't think I was going to get out of the country. The story he told me was, there was a glove box in a lab. He took some swipes of the gloves, and they had not cleaned the gloves. And right away, he knew he had found plutonium, and right away, they knew that he had found plutonium. Suddenly, there was an emergency evacuation alarm for the facility. Everybody was told they had to evacuate. There was some crisis. He left, but he had samples. Next day, they went back. The glove box was gone. The room had been repainted. The vent places for the glove box, where the glove box was vented, wasn't just the one glove box. They'd all been plastered over. And their attitude was, what glove box? We don't know about the glove box in this room. And he thought that he was going to get killed before he got out of the country. But he got out of the country. So those are kind of hairy stories from files of IAEA. This is where you find its sources and special fission material in Article 20. So this is another thing that you should understand, because it's really, really misunderstood by lots of people. I'll explain that in a minute. The IAEA defines a significant quantity, and it depends on the form of the material, etc. If you want to think about it, for uranium-235, HEU, unenriched uranium, and plutonium, for 233 and 235, these are both weapons, usable isotopes. That's 25 kilograms. For plutonium, it's 8 kilograms. So that's what defines, and there are other, there's a very complicated definition of some of these things. But the mistake that people make is thinking that that's the minimum required to make a nuclear weapon. It is not. You will find DOE references, open literature references from the Department of Energy saying for plutonium, you can make a bomb with 4 kilograms. So the significant quantity is more than what is required to make a weapon. But you will see a lot of people just divide by the SQ to say that's X number of weapons. Be careful if you do this. Inspection frequency is set so that it can detect diversion in SQ. So here's where the problem comes. Because if you're set up to detect 8 kilograms of diversion and you only need 4 kilograms per weapon, you got a problem. But if we change the SQ to 4 kilograms, it doubles the inspection frequency. In other words, if your inspection frequency for whatever facility, you knew that that facility would take at least a year to separate 8 kilograms, so you're inspecting once a year. If you say, well, now we're going to inspect for 4 kilograms, you've got to inspect twice a year. So it would make big changes in the requirements on the IAEA for their inspection frequencies. And that's politically unpalatable. So don't look for a big change in the SQ. If you want to read an interesting paper, Google Harry Van Tine, uranium-233, significant quantity. And you'll find a paper written by head designers at Los Alamos, at Livermore, maybe San Diego, I think, third guy. There's 3 authors. The third guy talking about why the SQ for uranium-233 was wrong and should be changed, and it was never going to change. So, detection and diversion, not prevention. Okay. Although there's obviously some deterrent effect by having this system in place. Now, if you know somebody's going to come looking for your material, maybe you're less likely to divert it, or maybe you're just more likely to make it very quickly. So, safeguards ties to export controls. The Zanger Committee deals with what types of devices, things like that, should be on a list. They generate a list. Nuclear suppliers group, voluntary grouping right now. One of the controversies is, should India be part of the nuclear suppliers group? Both have ties to IAEA safeguards. For example, as I mentioned earlier, the nuclear suppliers group is not supposed to supply equipment unless there are comprehensive safeguards in place. The US-India agreement, this is a type, what we call type 123 agreement. This is from section 123 of the Atomic Energy Act. Okay. This is the way, and I think there are 25, something over 25 of these agreements in place. This is the way we supply nuclear material and equipment to non-US entities. And about 6-7 years ago, we had made an agreement with India, a 123 agreement. Although India is not an NPT state, and this was extremely upsetting to a number of people. In fact, where I come from, this Military Institute down in Monterey, our director, Bill Potter, who's known Professor Knock and Professor Von River, if you ask him, he will say that the US-India 123 agreement was the biggest undercutting of the NPT that's occurred. We gave essentially NPT status to a non-NPT state. In return, though, under the 123 agreement, we got India to agree to a lot of nuclear safeguards type measures. We got them essentially to adopt a number of measures associated with the material that we gave to them. So, you know, if you argue the other side, you say that's a good idea. But take a look at these 1, 2, 3 reasons. So there's also a small quantities protocol. This is under a different type of document, GovM. These are Board of Governors. The way the IAEA works is it's not just the DG saying, here's how everything's going to be done. In fact, the DG just runs the Secretariat. Whereas a standing group called the Board of Governors meets 4 times a year, who actually control the agency. They say they set the guidelines, they approve budgets, etc. Of course, a lot of the work's done at the Secretariat, making proposals, and the Board of Governors meets 4 times a year. Once is in conjunction with the entire membership. The General Assembly meeting, it's always in September. So the Board of Governors meets the first part of the week, maybe the week before, and then you have the General Assembly, who then rubber stamps what the Board of Governors has done. But individual member states don't get to make policy. The Director General, although he can make from time to time policy changes, those are always subject to the Board of Governors. So if anything is going to get done, it has to get done by the Board of Governors. The Board of Governors is structured much like the UN Security Council. It has permanently seated members, and then it has rotating members. And the president will usually come from the rotating members because they can't agree to elect anybody from the permanently seated members as the president. So one of the things under this GovM document is it's designed for small quantities. These are the countries that have, you know, a few grams, a couple hundred grams of HE for experimental purposes, that sort of thing. Not nearly enough to make a weapon, fraction of a significant quantity. Design eliminates most of the paperwork. They still have to have a system in place to account for it, and they make a report. The paperwork is very minimal in comparison with the regular safeguards approach to do it.
George, excuse me, can you go back to
Sure.
one before? On that. Yeah. So we mentioned this, but just to reinforce the point, India never signed the NPT. They're not a signature. They're not a party to the NPT. They had this peaceful nuclear explosion in 1971. Then they detonated a nuclear weapon in 1998, May 1998, and declared themselves a nuclear weapon state. This is not allowed under the NPT, but as a sovereign state. They declared themselves a nuclear weapon state. That was 1998. When George W. Bush came in 2001, he was interested in strengthening U.S.-India ties, both to contain China and also to lure the Indians away from Russia. India and Russia had been very close throughout the Cold War. The Soviet Union was a chief supplier of weapons and other assistance to India. So there's a strategic motivation behind the U.S.-India agreement of 2006. It was 2006. And, but as George said, it was highly criticized in the U.S. by the arms control community, in the sense that we were assisting a non-signatory to the NPT in even just peaceful nuclear assistance. That's not permitted under the NPT. Probably if you were an attorney, and of course George is also an attorney besides a nuclear expert, you could claim that the U.S. violated the NPT by providing assistance to a state that is a nuclear weapon state. Right?
And in India, there were also conflicts about whether they should participate from their point of view. There was a minority opinion in India. This was not a good thing, that India was giving up some sovereignty by signing this 123 agreement and making an agreement on this. And guess who's also really, really critical of this agreement? Pakistan, sure.
Yeah. So yeah, same question. Is Pakistan constrained by any agreement or pacts or rules?
Pakistan is an IAEA member. It is not an NPT member. The three that are not, which people generally kind of lump into the same category, is Pakistan, India, and Israel. Okay, those three. There are other non-NPT members, but those are the ones that people are concerned about. North Korea was an NPT member. North Korea, you can withdraw from the NPT. There's no penalty for withdrawing from the NPT. But North Korea did it in a very strange way. They initially said, we're going to withdraw, and there's like, I forget what the length of term is, it's either 60 or 120 days. But you have to give notice. And then right at the end of that, within a day or two at the end of that, they said, no, we changed our mind, we'll stay in the NPT. And then years later, they said, no, here's our notice again, we're out. We're out as of a couple of days from now, because remember we told you before we're out. So there's a controversy as to whether that was a valid withdrawal. But that's like how many elephants can be on some head of a pin. In reality, it is not. But there was a time when, for the NPT meetings, the urban legend was that the chairman always carried a placard for North Korea in his coat in case they showed up.
And sorry, there's one other point. So this was done under George W. Bush's tenure. So then when Obama came in 2009, he had many colleagues who he appointed who were really pro-arms control. I was a member of the Defense Department the first 2 years of the Obama administration. And there were members of the administration who wanted to roll back, basically nullify the U.S.-India agreement on the grounds that it was in violation of the NPT. But ultimately, Obama, who very, Hamlet-like, weighing every microscopic plus and minus before making a decision, ultimately he decided that in fact this was overall the U.S. national security interest. This was part of the whole effort to really develop very strong ties with India, which was also growing rapidly economically and was to be a major power and superpower in the latter part of the 21st century. So that was under Obama, and now under Trump, there's been no interest in rolling this back. And Trump has, he values greatly his personal relations with national leaders, and Modi, Prime Minister of India, is one of his buddies, who's also a strong man, very tough, Hindu nationalist, tough on the Muslims in India. But India is a major player in South Asia. In fact, so much so that among our combatant commands, we divide the world into different combatant commands for the military. The U.S. Pacific Command, which we've had since World War II, has now been renamed the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. So that India looms very large in U.S. thinking and strategy about the Pacific and Asia. There's some additional background material about it. So this transcends the specifics of the nuclear issue.
So picking up on what Michael was just saying, how many of you think that the NPT prevents military use of nuclear material? I see people. Anybody think it does? No. Right. So what's the primary military use of nuclear material? Often referred to as a loophole in the NPT.
Propulsion.
Pardon me?
Propulsion.
Yeah, naval propulsion. It's not a loophole. The nuclear weapon states all had, well, not all, most of them had nuclear power submarines at the time, and it's a very conscious exemption. What are other military uses of nuclear material?
Nowadays, generation.
Pardon me?
Generation of electricity.
Generation of electricity, and in fact, right now, there's a new proposal that's out and about to come up with a small reactor that would be deployable. Some of us were talking about this the other day. I said, look, that's just SL1 writ large. SL1 was a reactor up at the Idaho lab. If you don't know the SL1 accident, you should study it and also see the DOE movie that they made about it, because it's kind of scary reenactment of what went on. But SL1 was a military reactor designed to deploy, and it killed 3 people. People always say, well, there's never been a failed reactor accident. Well, yeah, it has. SL1 killed 3 people. One guy they couldn't find, it turned out, because they were coming in and running in under timed systems and taking photographs. Nobody thought to look up, and he was pinned to the overhead with a control rod right stuck through him. And they were able to recover him. One of the people was recovered alive, but he was so radioactively hot they couldn't do anything. He was fatal anyway, but they couldn't provide medical treatment to him because he was so radioactively hot. So there was a more sophisticated SL1 called the PM3A, which was down on the ice in Antarctica. And I read an article the other day which was very critical of the PM3A, and they said, oh yeah, and it had these problems, and it was run by the Navy, and they didn't want to redo it. Well, you have to be able, when you look at things like that, to try and filter out the inter-service rivalry. I was around, I was a Navy officer at the time. The Navy didn't want to keep running this reactor down on the ice. They were looking for any good excuse to get rid of it. And so they did. Question?
How big are these reactors compared to like a Rickover reactor from one of the small subs?
They're more comparable to one of the smaller French subs. They're like about 100. They're up around 100 megawatts thermal. So you don't need for a small station. You don't need a lot. You can figure out what it is, but a good fraction of 100 megawatts electrical will do well for it. Submarine reactors, at the smaller end, some of the smaller French attack boats, I think it's Ariel class. I think they're all going at service now. Their reactors were about 85 megawatts thermal. Submarine reactors are rated by their thermal power output. Power reactors are typically rated by their electrical output. And usually you can use a 3-to-1 ratio to figure out what the thermal is. But a typical, one of the more modern submarine reactors might be 300, 350 megawatts. We've only had, US has only had one dual reactor submarine. Other countries, particularly Soviet Union, had a number of submarines with 2 reactors. Trying to think what the old Enterprise reactors were. Enterprise had 6 reactors. And I think they were each about 150 megawatts thermal, maybe 200 megawatts thermal. I just don't remember. They're relatively small reactors. And actually very relatively small in size. The the core of those reactors is about the size of a trash can. So you're talking about, when you look more modernly, and you're looking at small modular reactors, they're about the size of submarine reactors. Okay, so let's go on. Not too far. So we have the small quantities protocol. They're making changes to that now, and in fact, they may have already made that because there were some problems with it, so they weren't getting all the information they wanted to. So there's a new document that's either out or about to come out. So, you're aware of all these problems. I'm sure you've discussed a number of them in class. Iraq, Libya, Syria, South Africa, all these places where insert 153 safeguards weren't working. The inspectors in Iraq were inspecting it two ways. That they weren't just going in the right buildings. They weren't allowed to go in the right buildings. One thing should also say, under the safeguards agreements, is that's a military place. Stay out. It's got classified information. You inspectors can't go in. Well, yeah, that's so good. Suddenly we found that there are all these clandestine programs that people have been running, and that 153 might not be sufficient. So this led to insert 548. This is what's called the Model Additional Protocol. This was largely written by a woman named Laura Rockwood, a U.S. attorney who was the head safeguards attorney, who now runs the Middlebury Institute's office in Vienna. We have an office along with the Austrian government. And this is a new system. It's voluntary. You have to sign on. This is not required under the NPT. States have to sign up for it. And it's at about a little over 50% popularity. I don't remember the exact numbers, but about 50% of the states that have 153, which is the baseline comprehensive safeguards, have also signed up for the Model Additional Protocol. It is typically misunderstood. It doesn't give safeguards a lot of additional rights to do things. Safeguards could always make, under 153, an undeclared inspection, more or less. Still have to notify that the inspectors are coming, but they can do a short-term inspection. They just didn't do it. This makes it a lot easier to do short-term inspections. This makes it a lot easier to look at any place you want to look in a state, to try and verify at the state level, which the agency now calls the state level concept of safeguards, to verify that no material is being diverted. There's no weapons program running, sitting there waiting for material. So you have to look at the Model Additional Protocol, and it does allow for more inspection of the total fuel cycle. Safeguards doesn't start, and we can talk about this, until you get out of the ore concentrate state. So mining is not safeguard.
Excuse me. It's a little bit unclear. How do these safeguards choose which facilities to check? Is there
Okay. Under 153, 6 months before you introduce nuclear material into a facility, you have to tell the IAEA that we have a facility, and in 6 months we're going to put nuclear material in. It's a declaration by the state. This is how Iran got in problems. They did not declare their facilities. There wasn't anything wrong with them having the facilities, they just didn't declare them. That's originally how they had trouble. They had other troubles later. But you see, so what good is that? What good is that? I mean, what good is it to say, well, we rely on you to tell us where to come look? There's a problem with that. So now at the state level concept, where the agency makes some declaration, they have to have certain assurances, and they do things, they do more, they go beyond just the looking, beyond the inspections, beyond the declarations, and they look at things like overhead satellite surveillance. They act a little bit more like an intelligence gathering operation. Safeguards, IAM, information management, does that sort of thing. So, how do you implement safeguards? Well, you inspect. You have to train corps of inspectors, go and inspect. they'll put on sometimes tamper-resistant seals so that they can come back. They don't have to look inside the container because they can certify that the seals have not been broken. There's a problem with that when you think of it. The problem is that people forge the seals. Well, the agency will say, no, they can't. We've done a lot of experiments with this. It's impossible to forge these seals. I'm never sure that anything's impossible. They use a lot of non-destructive testing techniques, passive gamma spectroscopy, passive neutron versions, etc., to determine that what was there before is still there. Real-time monitoring, they may have cameras in place that transmit back to the unit. And they do these intelligence-like gathering systems. They not only look at satellite photography, they look at publications made by people in the country, scientific publications. They look at other information, import and export, things that are done. So they try and look at a whole bunch of things in order to be able to say with some certainty that this country is abiding by its requirements under the NPT. So, safeguards doesn't prevent non-proliferation, raises awareness. These loopholes, we talked about this. How many reactors are in space?
Not including RPGs, 0.
Zero?
There's a Russian one.
There's that like the death. Russians used to fly all sorts of reactors. If you look at Russian Warsats, radar ocean reconnaissance satellites, they carried originally a Ramashka reactor. They flew in low Earth orbit. Low Earth orbit is down around 100 miles up. And they were designed to then, at the end of their useful life, boost into a high energy or high parking orbit and sit there. There are probably 20 or 30 of them sitting up there now, decaying away, not producing much in terms of useful power. Why did they fly in low Earth orbit? Oh, you don't get the answers. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Answer.
I was carrier strikers.
Pardon?
Radar. I'm looking for carrier strikers.
Yeah. Yeah, we used to do, to confuse them, we would take a naval task force and we would merge it geographically and then we would bloom it. And whatever tracks they had up to that time, if they knew that this track coming this way was the USS Enterprise, suddenly they lost all the tracks. And that immediately you would see, in the Pacific, you would see a bear come out of Vladivostok, or two.
That's an
Because
answer.
a bear is a Tu-95, big, has 4 counter-rotating turboprop.
It's not really a bear. It's a Russian aircraft called a bear.
Yeah, they would come out and they would start trying to identify by sight what had happened, so they could pick up the tracks again. If you Google Cosmos 954, you will find a crashed Soviet reactor that crashed in Great Slave Lake up in Canada. This is in, somebody Google it and find out, I think it's 1979. A few years later, there was another one that failed to boost, so that the orbit degraded and came in. This one was going to go into Central Europe, and it skipped on the last pass. A couple of us were calculating it. It's very difficult to calculate the reentry of a body that's not designed to reenter, because parts start to fall off, and it skips, and this one skipped on its last pass and went into the Indian Ocean, never to be seen again. It was Cosmos 1056 or something like that. But if anybody find Cosmos 954?
Yeah.
Operation Morning Light. What year was it?
Launched on 77 to K2 was January 24th, 1978.
Okay. So it came back in 78, and it was spread out for about a 200-mile swath along the Great Slave Lake. During wintertime, Canadian and U.S. forces went up to recover what they could. As they were trying to recover stuff, they ran into 3 or 4 guys who had dog teams and sleds and were trekking across Canada in the dead of winter. They said, "What are you guys doing here?" Then there you try to throw bombs, That's not scary. Big adventure. And U.S. Navy Force said, well, we're looking for the satellite stuff that crashes. Oh, we found something interesting over here. And it was control rod housing, and it was fairly highly radioactive, strapped to one of their sleds. So, you're going to tell me. So, nothing prevents reactors in space. And in fact, if you do a Mars mission or something like that, and you mentioned RTGs, let's make sure everybody knows what those are. Radioisotopic thermal generators. You use them on land, you use them in the air. It accounts for one of the exceptions under some of the nuclear materials management regimes. Because in the US, we use plutonium-238 as a source for RTGs. So if you look at the CPPNN or insert 225 on nuclear security, an exemption is had for nuclear material which is more than 80% plutonium-238. Now, all plutonium is good for nuclear weapons. Plutonium-238, not so good because it's thermally really hot. If you Google plutonium-238, you usually see a picture of an engine which is glowing hot. Not good for weapons, unless you want to get this deep.
Where does plutonium-238 come from? How is it made?
Out of the air. No, just kidding. My little sister used to say things came from out of the air. That was her explanation for it. So sorry about that. If you look at, up until a few years ago, we bought it from the Russians, produced at MIIS. How do you produce plutonium-238? Probably by neutron exposure of separated neptunium-237. You look at the Radionuclides, neptunium had a neutron, becomes neptunium-238, decays, becomes plutonium-238. That implies that at least somebody has large stocks of separated neptunium-237, which also has critical mass. Everybody know what I mean by critical mass? Critical mass is sustained a reaction. This is a fission, fissile material. You can make a critical mass. If you can make a critical mass, you can probably make a fission bond. So neptunium-237 has a critical mass, but it's not safer. It's talked about in the safeguards regime as an alternate special fissile material, special fission material. But it's different. So other exceptions. Well, we've really been talking about this last one. Safeguards regime doesn't cover these other things like neptunium and radium. And maybe there's no reason to. The only states that could do that are probably the big nuclear weapon states. They're not complying with the NPT for the most part anyway. They're not obligated. They're not under safeguards. Although now we have voluntary compliance, at least at some facilities, by the US and the UK. I don't remember what France does or not. So it also doesn't account for non-state actors. And this is becoming more of a concern. When you have a group like ISIS that takes over a good portion of the country, what do you do about that? If you look at Georgia, significant areas of Georgia occupied by, who knows it, Russian influence, Russian dominance. Look at eastern Ukraine. In fact, I was in the Ukraine, I used to work with Interpol. They were telling us that they had 1,800 sources in eastern Ukraine, which they no longer can count for. It's not nuclear material, some of it's nuclear material, mostly, and some high-level radioactive sources. Okay. At the agency, you will hear them talk about the 3S concept. Security, safeguards, safety. Or security, safety, safeguards. I once had a slide that I used to show those three things, a Venn diagram. The intersection on the Venn diagram is in nuclear material. All of them have a role with nuclear material. Safeguards has no role with things that are not nuclear material. They don't care about a big cobalt-60 or cesium-137 radioisotope source for cancer care. Not their domain. Safety cares about that. Security cares about that. Safeguards is mandatory. Safeguards is mandatory for under the NPT for the non-nuclear weapon states, and for those agreed states now, like the U.S. will agree partial portion of it. Safety and security aren't. They are merely guidelines. There's a common misconception in the general public that the IAEA is a regulatory body like the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or like the CNEA in France. It is not. It has no power over anything that its members do. The guidance for safety and for security is just that, it is guidance. Unless, for example, under the 123 agreements, we say under the 123 agreements that you will comply with the IAEA's publication 225. Insert 225. Current revision is revision 5. So that becomes binding, at least as to whatever the U.S. applies. But there is one kind of minor exception to that. Under safety, if you don't comply with the IAEA safety standards, you're not supposed to get technical cooperation assistance. The agency is not going to train you with nuclear engineers, help you with medical radioisotopes and that sort of thing. That's almost never enforced. It's a potential hammer that's there that's really not enforced, at least in my mind. Safeguards has its own classification system, much like the U.S. classification system. There is safeguards confidential information, there is safeguards secret information, there is safeguards top secret information, generally following along the same guidelines that the U.S. system does in terms of the danger of having that turn on. And one thing that you need to understand, and even some people at IAEA don't understand this, safeguards information stays within safeguards. It does not come out unless the state who supplied that information agrees for it to come out. It doesn't come out to the rest of the agency. If you're in safety, you can't go over to safeguard and say, hey, what about that stuff in Egypt? Tell me about what the Egyptians are doing here. It doesn't happen. Now, safeguards may come to safety or come to security and say, well, what about this? Like in security, when we found undeclared nuclear material, they would come and say, tell us about that. So we go back, get these states in safeguards compliance. But it's a one-way, it's like an information diet. Only goes in one way. Not like a Zener diet. It's not, if it gets really important, it breaks down and the information comes through. It doesn't work that way. Okay. So, I mentioned safeguards doesn't deal with all this other stuff. An RDD, dispersal device, one type of which is a dirty bomb, or a simple exposure device, safeguards doesn't care about that. I mean, people may have some moral feeling about that, but they're not into guns, guards, and gates, and exposure to people. They're into how much material did you say you had? Where is it? Is it still where you told us it was? The agency does have a code of conduct for radioactive sources, but you have to read it. It doesn't deal with a lot of stuff. It deals with the way the agency classifies radioactive materials. We'll talk about that in a minute. And it only deals with some subset of that. And it only deals with sealed sources. So if my coffee cup is full of radioactive liquid, the code of conduct for radioactive sources has no application to that. Even if you agree to that, even if you thought it was a regulation. This is the way the IAEA categorizes radioactive material other than nuclear materials. 5 categories, going from 1 to 5, using Arabic numbers. There is a way of doing this. There's a publication, RSG 1.9. It's a safety publication. It has a list of what are called D values for almost every commercially useful radionuclide that exists. So for example, and it's done both in curies and in becquerels. And so you look it up and let's say that it's like cesium-137 and the D value is 1 curie, which I think it is for cesium-137, makes the calculation simple. If I have 100 curies of cesium-137, then I calculate what's called an A over D value. I take what I have, the 100 divided by the D value, that's 100. And you look at the table on the right and say, 100 falls between 1,000 and 10 in the right-hand column. So that's a category 2 source. So this is a way of categorizing and thinking about the hazards associated with other radioactive material. And that's the term the agency likes to use to distinguish it from the nuclear materials, which are in fact radioactive. So this is the way to categorize the nuclear materials. There are 3 categories. They are Roman numbered, Roman 1, 2, and 3. Material, material form, and mass. So these are categorized by mass. And I can tell that this comes from insert 225. The reason I know that is when you go over here, you have to always read the footnotes. And category 3, more than 15 grams. You go down here to footnote 3, it says quantity is not falling in category 3, and natural uranium, depleted uranium, and thorium should be protected, and of course it's good practice, or what's called something practice, appropriate prudent management practice. Anybody have any idea what prudent management practice is? Because the agency doesn't. There's nothing in this document that tells you what prudent management practice is. In fact, until revision 5, there was nothing in this control of nuclear material that told you what nuclear material was. Finally, after much hammering, British representative and I got people to agree on the fact that nuclear material, by definition, is what's in this table, including in the footnotes. So if you look at revision 5, you will see a definition in the back that says, look at, I think it's table 1, nuclear material is what's in this table plus what's in the footnotes. So that's an agency definition of nuclear material, one of them. But this is the way you categorize nuclear material. And the way this works into things in terms of the security regime is you start out with category 3 nuclear material, and they give you guidance as to what you need to do to protect that from a security point of view. You need lock this, you need so many fences, you need so many guards, or whatever it is. Then for category 2, you need what you have for category 3 plus the following. In category 1, you have what you need for 2 and 3 plus what you now have to add. So, last thing, the JCPOA, which we've now pulled out of. Agency has a big role in the JCPOA, some of which came as a surprise to them. The fellow who was the head of training for safeguards, we had some people in who were talking about this, and somebody said, oh, isn't the JCPOA just a safeguards group? And he said, I don't know what the JCPOA is, but I do know it's not safeguards. This is something totally new and different. And there's a question, because some of the talent required under the JCPOA is not talent that the IAEA had before this. In other words, the IAEA doesn't have people, did not have people that assume they do now, experts who go in and look at a centrifuge and tell what kind of modifications may have been made to that, change in design. So who inspects? That's a question, it's always a question. The Iranians still can keep inspectors out.
We have not discussed them and the JCPOA yet, including that in a couple of weeks. We'll have detailed discussion about Iran as a nuclear weapons aspirant.
So, how many of you would be interested in working at the IAEA? It's not that hard. Are you pointing at somebody?
Yeah, because I know.
Oh, you know who it is. Okay. How many of you are U.S. citizens? Okay, so if you're a US citizen and you're interested in working with the IAEA, you're in real trouble. I'm serious.
Only three minutes.
The US is not well liked. Big news, right? We no longer pay the most. The European Union now pays more than the US does. We were always a slow payer. In other words, we didn't pay on time. That perturbed people. Other countries are they're always on top of, how many American citizens do you have in this unit or that unit? And it's very difficult sometimes to get Americans into positions at the IAEA. If you're interested in safeguards, like being a safeguards inspector, you go through, there's a facility at Brookhaven that handles the safeguards input to the IAEA, and they lobby for American candidates as safeguards inspectors, with some success. If you're interested in other parts of the agency, then you go through Argonne National Laboratory, and there's a facility there to do that. It's a great place to be. And Vienna is always ranked number 1 or number 2 in terms of cities in the world where you like to live. I spent 5 years there. I love it. I still go back pretty routinely. I was back twice, January and February.
Very good student. It's a fattening place to work.
It is. It is.
All right, questions. Not having been a nuclear engineer, or at least a traditional nuclear engineer, when I came here in 2012 to become department chairman, I got a surprise that first year. And that is that since the U.S. is a voluntary corporate, I guess, all nuclear engineering departments in the country, and lots of other places, every year by January 31st, have to submit to the State Department a declaration called the Additional Protocol. So our Jeff Bickle, many of you know, now it's Alan Boland, would scurry around, and one of his tasks was to talk to all the faculty members, say, okay, what have you got down in the vault here? What's in the safe? Do you still have that subcritical reactor? We'd have to do an inventory of all this material that would roll up to the State Department. But they also wanted to know about codes. Any codes that are useful or relevant in designing a reactor, electronics codes, and so forth, which surprised me because you only talked about materials, and somehow they did a declaration on codes.
I don't know that that's for IAEA safeguards purposes. That may be more for export controls, because there are export controls on certain codes.
Right.
There's also a concept in export control which is called deemed export.
Yes.
And that's pretty ugly. There's a faculty member at the University of Tennessee.
In prison, yes.
Yeah, recently.
Yeah.
Went to jail, federal prison, for violating.
Right.
Now this guy had to be pretty arrogant because their export control person at the university said, look, this is the problem, what you're doing. You're taking people from these various countries, you are letting them work on projects, whether it's for the Air Force, and we shouldn't be doing that. And this guy said, mind your own business, I do this all the time. So the export control person reported him to the government agency sent the Justice Department, FBI, and he went to jail for 5 years.
So maybe they're doing two things at once, but I do know the material stuff was a roll-up for safeguards.
Yeah, it wasn't true that the department at some point was missing some uranium.
Oh, yes,
enriched uranium.
that was Don Olander, yes, that's right.
And it's probably burned out.
We're still doing push-ups for that.
Yes.
So what's the relationship between the IAEA and the UN Office of Disarmament Affairs?
None.
None.
None, realistically. No. You have people who, for example, a lot of our students go to UNODA and then go to the agency or take internships at one or the other. But there's none.
That's
And sure, a lot of this stuff is curious. I mean, this is one of the reasons why it's fun to give this talk, because, you know, until you go to the agency, you assume the agency is like a monolith. And sure, I can go to the agency of security. I should know about safeguard stuff because that's important. How can you design a security program if you don't know what their holdings are? It doesn't work that way. Yes.
So if I'm a bad actor state, and I just, like, I let your people in, but I don't really care what you think, so I just do it anyway. And I'm like, oh, and they're like, you're missing, I don't know, 16 kilograms plutonium. I'm like, oh, what? Yeah, what do you do about it and how fast do you?
Well, that's a real question. The way it's supposed to work is when a violation is detected, which has been done probably, I don't know, half a dozen times in the last 20 years, the DG goes to the UN Security Council and says, here's what we have observed. What are you going to do about it?
So information can come out of your.
Information, when it's a report of a violation, can come out. But it goes to the Security Council. And it probably goes, I don't know this for a fact, but it probably, if it's like considered secret safeguards information, probably is protected by the Security Council before they make a decision at some level of security.
So if they violate one thing, but it's not really related, like let's say you suspect them of doing something, but you don't really know, but you know if you told the security people, they could probably act on it. But they violated something small, something kind of stupid, you know, like something really small, they didn't put their name on it.
Well, I mean, for example, the Egyptians did some people at one facility decided to do some plutonium separation chemistry without widespread knowledge. As a violation, I reported. Now, you could argue that was a small violation.
Yeah.
But I think not the error, but I think that the inspection people default to reporting it rather than not reporting it. I think the agency defaults to reporting to the Security Council rather than non-reporting. Now, there's a whole series, every year there's an annual safeguards report. And I don't remember, there are some very precise terms that are used in the annual safeguards report. And it depends on the level of assurance that they can give about a particular state. And a lot of states, that level of assurance is not real high. But it's not that they have detected a violation which they're reporting to the Security Council. It's just that they don't have enough information, they don't feel they have enough information to say with the highest level of confidence that there's no violation going on. So that's monitoring, and you can look that up.
I have one more question, comment?
So since 2014, when Russia decided to take Crimea and expanded its activities in eastern Ukraine, have you seen a change quantitatively or qualitatively in the way that smuggling and trafficking of radioactive and nuclear materials happen there?
The answer to that is no. There's concern because these facilities are, there's also, I thought what you were going to ask is how's the IAEA dealt with this? Because the IAEA does not recognize the Soviet or Russian dominance in eastern Ukraine or in Crimea. And you've got reactor facilities in Crimea, and who safeguards those? The IAEA is not going there now because the Ukrainians don't control that, even though this gets into politics. One of the things you find when you work at international agency is there are a lot of politics. Former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, firearm. Occasionally, someone in my section would put out something to refer to as Macedonia. We would get a call from the Greek ambassador or even a demarche saying, this is not Macedonia. This is the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Do not refer to it as Macedonia. Yeah, it's politics. Michael mentioned that I was the scientific secretary of what's called ADSEC, the Director General's Advisory Group. When we had an opening, I get calls personally from embassies, from the ambassador saying, you know, isn't it about time that you get somebody from my country on the ADSEC board? Or this candidate I know has been proposed, what are you going to do about it? Not me, pick the wrong person. Call our director. So,
Please, let's give Dr. Mann. We have spring break now. We come back Monday, April 1st. and Brad Roberts from Livermore will discuss central and extended deterrence. It's a great time to catch up on the project.
I'm going to be gone from April 2nd